Hello there, I'm Clifford Bates. I'm a professor at Warsaw University's American Studies Center. I'm here today to talk to you about my recently published book, The Centrality of the Regime for Political Science, published by Warsaw University Press. Available only for international people via Amazon DE, but it's easy to get because if you just use your normal Amazon account, you can log in there. And right now, it's cheap in the sense that shipping into the United States together with the book was under $15. So it's not ridiculously priced. Otherwise, if you're in Poland, you can get it through either local academic bookstores or by the University Press's website. Now, the function of the book is divided about the concern of politeia and Aristotle's treatment of politeia as a means to understand political science and the way political behavior operates by. Now, the book is divided clearly into 4 chapters plus an introduction. The introduction just introduces the theme of the concept of the regime or the politeia as the framework by which, as a tool that we can see as the origins to understand the way, not only to understand and differentiate one political system from another, but also as a means to understand how change occurs within a given political form. Now, the first chapter looks clearly at the political community, the place that the regime operates in. And it looks at the time of Aristotle, the polis, or the civitas, the political form, as the model by which political community operates. And the book offers the argument is, well, why the way justice and the need for justice and the necessity of man's natural capacity to live in the city, and that the city fulfills man's ability to achieve justice, that the other forms, the household, the tribe, is not able to, not as fully able to develop. And looking at some, not only Aristotle, but also Aeschylus's Aristotle as kind of a tool to understand this question. The second chapter looks firmly at Aristotle's politics, particularly book 4, 5, and 6, at the question of his regime sciences, his politeia, his science of politeia. And it looks at his treatment of what politeia means, why, and to translate politeia, why the term regime, whereas the older term constitution is a much more preferable term. The Constitution was very much the traditional from the medievals onwards, but there's a problem with that because it's associated with legalism in legal form, overly legalistic. The regime is a more modern interpretation of politeia. Now, the Latins called politeia res publica. That's how they translated it. And this is why Plato's famous book about his regime, his politeia, is called The Republic. But book chapter 2 follows Aristotle's treatment of it, and does so primarily with the intent to look at his treatment as why it works as it works, why it allows a better understanding of the various parts, how the parts interact and direct, the goal towards which the given community aims at, the way the institutions work, and the way the social dynamic operates. Now, this leads us to a problem, and that problem is the next chapter. Chapter 3 is the chapter which looks at the way what I call the marginalization of Aristotle's concept of regime happens. And this happens in a twofold way. First, through the Roman use, and the argument here is that Plato, what happened was, not Plato, but the Romans did not get Aristotle's politics or something. It simply forgotten, lost. Neither the Romans nor the Arabs knew it. It was only rediscovered in Europe around the 13th, 14th century with the rediscovery of all these ancient Latin texts. Now, with that rediscovery, a new political science, but at the time of Rome, the dominant understanding of the concept of politeia was understood by Plato. Plato's Republic, and the cyclical understanding of regime and the structure. And also because Plato and Plutarch never clearly explained the relationship of the regime to the polis that Aristotle did. Plutarch will then apply this to the Roman Empire. And it's not only Rome itself, but the Rome at its second century height of dominance and power as a means to understand the Roman constitution, the Roman political form. And in doing so, this is kind of a distortion of this. And this also leads to the way the politeia is understood, the regime of the empire, and therefore it becomes something detached from it. And it becomes more legalistic in later approaches. It becomes much more legalistic. This Ciceronian use of it becomes much, in the later medievals becomes much more legalistic, and it becomes less useful to understand the dynamic and change within a form that Aristotle's treatment of in his Politics offered. Now, the other mechanism of marginalization is the modern thinkers. The modern thinkers particularly starting with Machiavelli onwards, sought to replace the various political systems that emerged after the collapse of the Roman Empire. That of the city, the polis itself, the political form of civitases and cities, the church, the empire, all of these other forms that were there, leagues and things, were competing for power. And that what Machiavelli saw that this doesn't work. And instead he offered his new concept, the state, l'Stato. And the state, however, was an instrument of will, not an instrument of nature. It is something artificial constructed, humanly constructed in order to impose order on a political form, and to achieve a new mode in order to allow greater success and to allow man's happiness to achieve that nature itself could not deliver. Therefore, what happens with Machiavelli has no room for the treatment of politeia or regime structures. He still has his dichotomy between and the prince is clearly the dichotomy between princes and republics. In his discourses, he does give some variations of type, but these are simply brought because this is the older tradition. He mentions the older tradition and then puts it away and replaces it with the state. The state and it's the ruler's will, and this becomes the instrument to do this. Now, this transition from Machiavelli to Bodin to Grotius to Hobbes shows the state new and how each one of these authors kind of marginalizes Aristotelian concepts even further, to the point where with Hobbes, what replaces the regimes become just the different forms of government, and it's completely unimportant. What defines the state for Hobbes is the collection of the general wills of the forces that constitute the civic order, that do the social contract. This becomes the means by which the will is formed and the political state is emerged. And therefore, the state is now no longer has any room for the regime. And particularly with the rise of the nation state. The third chapter ends on that, the discussion of the nation state. With the nation state, the people, the ethnicity, the raw ethnic identity now becomes the means by which the state is to be understood. This irrational, this non-voluntary concept of race, particularly in a later understanding, now becomes the means by which the 19th century conception of the state hits its peak and the political form arises. Now, the last chapter, 4, which ends the book, examines the way Anglo-American behavioral and post-behavioral approaches, and also counter-behavioralist approaches, looked at the conception of, in an Anglo-American political science, looked at an attempt to run away from the state theory of the 19th century, which was either too dominated by a ethno-nationalism or a rational economic approach of economy, of the liberal model, or a legalistic approach of the Anglo-American, kind of the French Anglo-American approach. So therefore, an overly legalistic administrative model, an economic liberal model, and then this kind of this idea of the ethnic state is something that was not understandable, and they sought to reject it. The behavioralists sought a new model. They offered a new model, but this model doesn't work because it ended up Almond and Easton's system model that's used to kind of frame, to explain political behavior. It explains the same model, although it allows it shows, doesn't tell you how to differentiate one type from another type. It explains everything, and as an explanation of everything, it offers no answer. And actually, because it doesn't really help you understand anything and differentiate, it offers not a useful system. Therefore, it's a fun. And this is why people became disappointed with it. Even people like Dahl became disappointed with it. And Robert Dahl then created his two-dimensional model of this, of using Tocqueville. And this becomes the means by which he then arises his model. His twofold Tocquevillian model becomes a regime model by which you can measure and shape where you are on political regimes, and also shape how one regime can change over time. This was taken further by someone like Tilly. And what this book shows is how all these models ultimately don't work. That all these approaches, the behavioralists of Almond and Easton, the neo-state thinkers that emerged, like people like Huntington, their reattempt to do this, or even Sam Feiner, the English thinker Sam Feiner's model. All of these attempt to restore something like the regime as a model to help respond to the behavioralists. It really ended up being falling apart, and I show this. And this book ends. And it ends on the showing that how Aristotle's treatment of this offers a more superior model to understand political form. One that both helps you explain how one form differs from the other form, how one form, it allows you to think descriptive approach to understand how the political form operates and how the regime differentiates from one from another, but also helps you to explain how within one form, how one form can go from one regime to another regime in the same moment. That the forces, it helps you understand the forces that move it. It also explains how the change occurs. So therefore, this book is kind of a little mini book trying to show how Aristotle's conception of regime is the most important way that we can understand political science. Again, the book is called The Centrality of the Regime for Political Science from Washington University Press. Thank you very much and have a nice day.